buon pomeriggio a tutti. Parlerò in inglese poiché i nostri ospiti parleranno anche in inglese, par condicio fra noi ci siamo messi d'accordo così. So my name is Federico FUBINI, I'm a Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Corriere della Sera, and I will chair this very interesting, very promising session on the present and the future of the Chinese economy, 17.1% of the world economy, the second largest economy in the world. A big question mark as well, maybe an economy that is bifurcating between traditional heavy industry and a very promising high-tech sector. I'd be interested to see what Mr. YONGDING has to say, but first of all, let me introduce the person to whom that we have to thank first of all for this opportunity to having YONGDING here with us. Rob Johnson is president of INET. INET is a very important institution in the global economic debate, Institute for New Economic Thinking. It was founded by Rob Johnson himself. I think it was 6 years back in the aftermath of the Great Recession, in the aftermath of the collapse of Lehman, and it really inspired a lot of new thinking about economic theory, and not only that. So Rob, you have the floor.
Thank you, Federico. So, Institute for New Economic Thinking. About a year and a half ago, somebody asked me, what's new and different? And they asked me to write an article with 4 points where we might not understand what was happening. Pick the most important 4 points, they said. And so I picked 4 regions. Italy, because it's at the fulcrum, both north and south, of the tensions that will affect the Eurozone. It has a very large sovereign bond market, very competitive in manufacturing and fashion, was the first. India, for reasons I won't explore too much today, but it is large, and the role of government in a very concentrated corporate and very poor country at the same time portends a great challenge. The third place I picked is the place where I grew up, which is Detroit, because of the tensions in American politics and how that is manifest when the economy is in transition and declining, as Detroit has, and where the issues of race become very, very important and polarizing related to the politics, which we're experiencing a great deal of this year. And the fourth was the question of China. China, which comes from a different philosophical tradition than the which you might call Enlightenment tradition of Descartes and those who followed. And while the Chinese people, you have taught me, are very knowledgeable, they don't always agree with the Enlightenment perspective. And this affects their economic thinking. So there is a prospect of new economic thinking emanating from China that I think is very exciting. Having said that, it is, as many people feel, mysterious and difficult to comprehend. And I had the good fortune in about 2009, before INET was formed, to work on the Stiglitz Commission as commissioner, and one of my colleagues was YONGDING, who taught us all, and me particularly, a great deal about China, and he's continued to serve as my teacher to this day. He and his, I believe, graduate school classmate, Wang Hui, who we brought here, and he made the opening speech 2 years ago in Roberto for this festival, have been great allies to INET, and I can think of nothing I would rather do than bring someone who's been my teacher to share with all of you so that we can enjoy this learning and his insights together. YONGDING is the president, or has been the president of the Chinese, what is it called, Society of World Economics, and he was at the Chinese Academy of Social Science, where he was the director for many years of the Institute of World Economics and Politics. He served on the PBOC, People's Bank of China Monetary Policy Committee, He's a leading spokesman, both at home and internationally, about both what is happening in China and also how Chinese perceive the Western economies. He did his doctorate, Doctor of Philosophy in Economics at Oxford University. And as I said, he's been a great teacher to all of us and helping us to better understand and both what you might call the structures and the evolution of China. And so I'll turn it over to you today to help us understand these challenges within your country.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to come to Italy. I shall say I love Italy very much. I never hesitate to accept invitation to go to Italy. Actually, I was in Sabino last month. At my age, I should not travel so often, but I will not decline any invitation from Italy. Anyway, I can guarantee that. In this afternoon, I just want to use something like 40 minutes to give you some brief introduction about China's past achievement and challenges China now is facing, and also debate within China about how to face China's current challenges. First of all, I think we should recognize that China's achievement over the past 35 years is truly amazing. I think it's miracle. Miracle means something God made. It's really very rare. And here are some figures. You see, in 1980, China's GDP is just less than $200 billion US. And last year, China used $800 billion to pump up China's exchange rate. You see the change. Now China's GDP is more than 10 trillion US dollars, the second largest in the world. In 2004, China was on the par with Japan. China just catch up with Japan. But 5 years later, China's GDP is more than double than Japan's. You can see that's truly amazing. Here you can see the dramatic rise of the Chinese economy, especially after the 90s. This is really very, very fast. China's GDP actually, I think it's more than 50 times as large as in 2018. And so it's something really horrible, especially for my American friends. They, they fear that China is catching up very quickly. And you see now China's GDP is more than 60% of US GDP. And if China can keep current growth momentum, then perhaps within 30 years, China will be catch up with the United States. Unfortunately, I'm too old to see this day. But anything can happen, as Larry Summers rightly pointed out, a regression to the mean. Because this miracle cannot last forever. So there must be changes. So what sort of changes? What sort of challenges China is facing? That is something we, within China, really worry very much about. Here, you see the change in Shanghai Pudong area. The first picture is about 30 years. And you see the east side of this Huangpu River, that basically the village. But now you can see these skyscrapers and so on, I think at par with New York. This is something, a very dramatic change in China. And now we are facing problems. After 30 years, breakneck high growth, China's growth rate has been falling. Now in China, there are different views about China's potential growth rate. And over the past 30 years, the average growth rate of the Chinese economy is 10%. Now it has been falling quite significantly. People like Justin Yifu, the chief economist of World Bank, argue that China's growth potential should be still as high as 8 to 9%. But for most Chinese economists and government officials, China's potential growth rate is something like 6.5%. In China's 13th five-year plan, I was one of advisors to this planning committee. According to this committee, China's potential growth rate has been fallen from 10% to 6.5 to 7%. This is a consensus view in China. Why China's high growth rate has been falling? There are lots of causes. One of the very important causes, I can use sort of a Chinese saying. In Chinese, there's a word, there's a phrase calling the failure is the mother of success. In current China's situation, I can say the success is the failure of is the mother of the failure, because we are too successful in the past 30 years. Now we are getting some fruit of that success to such extent. There are lots of reasons. I just named some of those reasons why China's growth potential has been falling. Number one, that's narrowing space for structural reforms. Why China start to take off in early 80s? It's very simple. That is liberalization. Until later 70s, all farmers were working at the collective farm, people's commune. I worked there. Each morning at 6 o'clock, there's a bell. Then you got up, then you go to field to whatever you were asked to do. Then in 12 o'clock, you go back to have some lunch, very simple. Then in 2 o'clock, you go to field again. Then at 7, you come, not home, you come to a meeting room to summarize the achievement that you did this day. So we repeat this decades. So very naturally, it cannot be very productive. So it's very simple. Chinese government disband people's commune to allow farmers to make decisions to produce what, to allow them to sell their products. So overnight, people are incentivized. They work much harder, and because the Chinese are very hardworking. So if they work very hard, they can get something in return. Then they really work very, very hard. So certainly, just because this very simple reform, China's productivity increased quite dramatically. I will not name all those examples. There are lots of examples. Reform is extremely important. But after 30 years, those easy reforms have been accomplished. It's now we are facing much more difficult reforms. For example, how to reform state-owned enterprises. It's become much more difficult. So you cannot hope that by just do some further structural reform, then China's economic growth will increase quite dramatically. Those days has gone. And also there are lots of reasons I will not elaborate. Secondly, I name here that is a diminishing return of scale, because the Chinese economic scale become much larger, and the room for catching up by learning and copying becomes smaller and smaller. So all these sort of factors have a negative impact on China's long-term potential growth rate. So it's very natural. After 30 years high speed with a 10% growth rate, Chinese economy will become slowing down. That is inevitable. So at this moment, Chinese government and Chinese people are worried about so-called middle income trap. When China's reform started, per capita income is $200 US. Now China's per capita income is something like 8,000 US dollars. So we worried if China's economy continue to grow, if people's income continue to grow, whether China will fall into so-called middle income trap. So this is really a very serious challenge. The answer to this long-term slowdown is that Chinese government will continue to carry out structural reform so that China will be able to maintain a much slower but still decent growth rate. If China in the next decade or two will be able to maintain growth of, say, 5 to 6% per year, then hopefully within 30 years, China will be able to catch up with the United States. So while I recognize the fact that China's long-term growth potential has been falling, at the same time, we worry more about China's current growth rate. From this figure, you can see that China's actual growth rate has been falling steadily, gradually since 2010. In 2010, the growth rate is still something like 12%. Now the growth rate is less than 6.7%. Last quarter is just 6.7%. I think this quarter, the growth rate will be slower. So you can see the slowdown of China's growth potential. So recently, Chinese official, a mysterious authoritative insider, said that as a whole, China's economic trajectory will be L-shaped rather than U-shaped. He said, I must underscore that the L-shaped curve is projected to last a period rather than a year or two, meaning that Chinese authority realize in next few years, how many years, nobody knows, but anyway, in next few years, maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, China's economic growth will be rather slow. A very important question among Chinese economies is that whether the economy at this moment is operating at full capacity. This is a very controversial issue within China. Let me explain. Because, as I just said, Chinese recognize China's long-term growth potential has been falling to something like 6.5 to 7%. Okay? This is one thing. Another thing is current growth rate. Current growth rate is something like 6.7%. So if we believe these two figures, if we believe China's growth potential is something like 6.5%, if we believe the figure of China's current growth rate is 6.7%, then you will think China now is growing at its potential growth rate. If this is the case, then there's no need for government to take any expansionary fiscal and monetary policy to stimulate the economy, because the economy is already growing at its potential, right? But this is a very questionable proposition. What is reality? What is China's real growth rate? To be honest, I do not believe that China's growth rate at this moment is something like 6.7%, as shown by official statistics. The problem is that at this moment, China is suffering from overcapacity. China's actual growth rate is below the so-called potential growth rate. And there are many measures to see whether an economy is growing at its potential. Inflation. China's CPI, core CPI, for many years is just 1%. As a developing country, it's extremely low. And we also know CPI tended to be overestimated. If a country's CPI is 1%, perhaps the country's CPI is less than 1%, perhaps 0%. There are always overestimation. More importantly, China's PPI, that's a producer price index, has been in negative territory for 50 months, almost 5 years. It's long term. And China's GDP deflator last year was negative. So in terms of a price level, you can say that Chinese economy is growing below its potential, okay? And also, we need to check employment. In China, the statistic about employment is not very reliable because China is a sort of a dual economy. Farmers will go to city to find a job. After 3 months or 7 months, they return to countryside. It's very difficult to figure out what is the employment rate. Then we can use so-called facility utilization rate. And in China, there isn't official statistic about this facility utilization rate, but there are some surveys made by Industrialist Association. According to their statistic, the utilization rate is less than 70%. Okay, less than 70%. In normal time, the rate should be more than 80%. Here is China's PPI. I just show you that for 50 months, CPI has been dropping. You can see here. This is a PPI. Sometimes more than minus 5% continuously. This is a very important sign of deflation. In China, we are suffering from deflation. CPI is also low here, okay? So this figure, actually, I just mentioned, according to industrial survey, for whole industrial sector, facility utilization rate is 67.8% and also falling. So there are also other evidence showing that the Chinese economy is operating under capacity. For example, China's imports has shrunk by 13% last year. When people are talking about China is an engine of global growth, actually people are talking about China import a lot of things, oil, gasolines, manufacturing goods, so on and so forth. But last year, the absolute amount of imports fall. Why? This is because China's growth rate has dropped. In volume. Yeah, I think so. I need to check. Okay. So there are lots of signs showing that China's economy is suffering from overcapacity. And so the logical conclusion is that, in my view, either China's growth potential is underestimated. As I said, according to official view, China's potential growth rate is 6.5 to 7%. And or the actual growth rate is overestimated because according to the statistic, actual growth rate is 6.7. So that do not add up. So either overestimate actual growth rate or underestimate the potential growth rate, or both. I think both, and especially we overestimate actual growth rate. So the true growth rate may be lower than official figure shows. So the challenge facing China. What is the challenge? I think there are two kinds of challenge. The one is China's potential growth rate has been falling. This is a big challenge, from 10% to lower to maybe 8% or 7%. Anyway, it's slowing down. This is a long-term challenge. The second challenge is actual growth rate is too low compared with China's potential growth rate. So in order to, so China has to try to improve the potential growth rate by further China's structural adjustment, because there are still rooms for China to complete its structural reforms. For example, we need to reform state-owned enterprises. We should introduce competition policies. We should continue to deregulation about a lot of things. And also, China needs to make the government more efficient to play a better role. And for the short run, and China needs to use especially macroeconomic policy to pump up the economy, to prevent the economy from sliding further. Actually, in China, there are lots of very good plans about economic reforms, especially in the third plenary of the 18th Party Congress. There is a very comprehensive plan about the reform of China's whole economic structure. But the problem is that after drawing up a very comprehensive, very encouraging reform program, people tend to shelve those programs because there isn't action plans how to implement those reforms. There are no timetables for each reforms. So I think there's still a very large room for Chinese government to implement those structural reforms. As a result of these structural reforms, I think China will be able to stabilize its growth potential. And also, there's hope in the next few decades, China will be able to make this potential growth rate even a little bit higher. So this is one thing. And the second thing, I think, is to reduce the kind of gap between actual growth rate and the potential growth rate through macroeconomic management. So this, at this moment, I think is a very serious problem in China. Because in China, everybody agrees that China should carry out with the structural reforms. But very few people now are discussing how to use expansionary fiscal policy and monetary policy to stimulate the economy. Why it is the case? Because in 2008, China introduced a very famous so-called 4 trillion stimulus package, which was very successful in stopping the economy from falling. But unfortunately, because the government introduced this plan in a rush, so created lots of overcapacity, make lots of waste, and especially because this 4 trillion stimulus package was financed by bank credit. So the credit increased very dramatically, and China's corporate debt become a very serious problem. So there's sort of a stigma about using expansionary fiscal policy. So people, especially economists, do not want to talk about this. I think this is not the right attitude. In my view, this 4 trillion program, the basic direction is correct. The problem is implementation. The problem is Chinese government should use its own money. China should use government expenditure to finance this 4 trillion rather than rely on credit expansion. But that is another story. In order to persuade the government to use expansionary fiscal policy to stimulate the economy, you need to analyze what's the cause of China's slowdown, the current slowdown. Here you can see that this is about China's the growth rate of China's investment. In China, investment can be divided into 3 major categories. The number 1 is manufacturing investment. Number 2 is infrastructure investment. Number 3 is real estate investment. China's problem is that investment share, the share of investment account a very large proportion of the economy. It's too large. China's investment rate is more than 46%. It's way too high, okay? But more importantly, among these very high investment, real estate investment has been increased too fast. Here you can see this real estate investment. In 2010, the growth rate of real estate investment is 40%, something like 40%. Real estate investment account for more than 14% of GDP. I think in Europe, Spain is very famous by very high real estate investment. I think the share is much less than this, maybe 8%. But in China, 14%, way too high, and create lots of problems. So the Chinese government tried to clamp down on real estate investment. So here you can see the real estate investment has been falling steadily. By the end of last year, the growth rate of real estate investment is 1%, from 40% down to 1%. And also, the investment, real estate investment account for 14% of GDP. You can imagine, just because the slowdown, the dramatic slowdown of real estate investment, the down pressure on growth will be very, very large. Okay, so ideally, okay, this is some comparison of China's real estate investment with Asian countries. One is Japan, another is Korea. For Japan, in their bubble time, the growth, the share of real estate investment is something like 8% of GDP. But China here, you see, here, 14%. So way too high compared with other countries. So more houses. This is a very famous phenomenon in China. This is skyscrapers in Shanghai. I think it's comparable to New York. And there are some figures. And 3 years ago, when I was invited by Chicago Council to talk about China's economic growth, I told my American friends, you don't need to worry too much about China's catching up. I don't know whether I can see this catching up in my lifetime. But I can guarantee that very soon, in terms of a number of skyscrapers and in terms of five-star hotels, China will catch up very soon. Okay, these are the figures. In China, this by end of 2013, skyscrapers in China is 470, and also 332 under construction. Okay, so this is I mean, very soon China's the number of skyscrapers will surpass United States. And five-star hotels, by the end of 2013, there are 696 five-star hotels and 500 under construction. So in this regard, China is also catching up with the United States. But don't forget, China's per capita income last year is something like $8,000 US. In the United States, I think of $50,000 US, right? And so according to some report, in China, home ownership is more than 90%, more than 90%. In Beijing, affordable house, the standard foot floor is 90 square meters for affordable house. Don't remember, China is a poor country. So I think in this regard, China really has gone mad. So it's absolutely right for the government to clamp down on real estate investment, because to spend so much, to use so much resources to build houses is a vast misallocation of resources. This is not just an economic problem, and also a problem with the corruption. Here, there are some materials. I thought, when I first saw this photo, I thought this is in Geneva, but actually not. This is in a local province, okay, in a very poor province. This is an official building for provincial government. This for a district government building, a small district, okay, not a city, not a province. This is a small county. I thought this is Capitol Hill, but this is a small county. And you can see lots of these sort of things. So this is not only a waste of money, but also is sort of a corruption. And because real estate investment plays such an important role, and so the whole economy will be influenced if you clamp down on real estate investment. Steel industry is example. China's steel production capacity is 1.2 billion ton. 1.2 billion ton. And China's oil capacity at this moment, I think, in steel industry is larger the whole output of the world. And so because clamp down on real estate investment, so demand for steel fall quite dramatically. So as early as in 2012, the overcapacity in the steel industry has become very serious. Now it's even more serious. As a result, the profitability of this industry is extremely low. It's not 4%. Now, perhaps last year, negative, okay, the profitability. And also, this very telling story is that the profit on 2 tons of steel was just about enough to buy a lollipop in 2012. Last year is something similar to the price of cabbage. So this is the problem with the overcapacity. So the question is, how China can deal with this situation? Some people argue that we just stop intervention. If we stop intervention, then because overcapacity, the price will fall. Because price will fall, then demand will increase, supply will be reduced. So the economy will reach to equilibrium. But that is not the case, because now we are facing a deflationary spiral. In China, we have 2 types of deflationary spiral. One is overcapacity deflation spiral. Another is classical debt deflation spiral. Now we are facing these 2 spirals. Here, I give you some example. As a result of this overinvestment, so we have overcapacity here, right? Because overcapacity, PPI is falling. Because the falling of prices, so profitability of the enterprise fall. So in response to the falling profitability, enterprises will deleverage and also reduce its investment. Because you reduce investment, so overcapacity becomes more serious. And there's another channel, that's falling PPI means that the debt, the real debt, has been increasing. Okay, real debt has been increasing in enterprises. Because the real debt has been increasing, so the enterprise has to deleverage. The enterprise has to cut their investment. As a result, we have more overcapacity. So this will cause reduction in production, and this will fall. So it will not stabilize unless you take some action. So this is China's corporate profitability. Actually, this is the total corporate profits. Last year become negative. The total profit has been falling. Okay, and also to make things worse, China's real interest is very high because negative PPI. So real interest is something like 5 or 7%. So this also causes huge problem for China's corporate. So as a result, China's corporate debt to GDP ratio has been increasing very dramatically. We did some simulation. According to our simulation, by 2020, China's corporate debt to GDP ratio will be something like 200%. I think it's extremely high, maybe the highest in the world. This is our problem. No, just industrial corporations, no financial. So what should be the policy responses? Now the government emphasized the importance of a supply-side structural reform. I think this is important and necessary, but this can solve long-term issue. It will not solve the short-term problem. So in order to solve the short-term problem, in order to break this deflationary spirals, China need to introduce expansionary macroeconomic policy, especially use expansionary fiscal policy, and to invest in infrastructure. Only by this way, China will stabilize economic growth and also will help to improve growth potential in the future. And so my formula is that increase fiscal deficit to financial infrastructure investment. I think this is the most important policy we should adopt. Of course, monetary policy should accommodating. Then exchange rate policy. My view is that China should stop intervention in foreign exchange market to allow RMB to flow. And at the same time, China should strengthen the management of cross-border capital flows. I think this is very important. Why I'm arguing to use expansionary fiscal policy to increase investment in infrastructure? Because China's fiscal position is very good. according to the Minister of Finance, he makes a statement last week. China's total public debt over GDP ratio is 41.5%, including local government debt, compared with Italy and many European countries. That is extremely comfortable position. So there's tremendous room for government to increase its budget deficit. China's current budget deficit over GDP ratio is less than 3%. In my view, it will cause no problem whatsoever if China's budget deficit over GDP ratio become 5%. No problem. If we increase this budget deficit to use budget deficit to finance infrastructure investment, China's economic growth can get a very larger boost. And this will be also beneficial to the rest of the world. Actually, we have lots of projects which need investment. Give one example. In Beijing, in summertime, if there's heavy rain, you can be drowned in city center. This happened 3 years ago. A driver get into a bridge, under a bridge in the highway. Then, because the sewage system is stopped working, so that gentleman was drowned. So which means that there's lots of things we can do. And in Italy, I was very impressed by your sewage system. I was frightened when I looked through this iron bar to see how deep is the sewage system. In China, man cannot go through this sewage system. Rats can. This is a very big problem. So China can invest in a very big way. So anyway, we have a very good plans. For example, this is China's future road system. Okay, every town with the population more than 200,000 will be connected by highway. And also China's high-speed rail system is very good. 10,000 kilometers, very comfortable. I think better than most European fast train. Okay, and this is China's network, rail system. And also, I don't have time to elaborate about China's so-called One Belt, One Road system. This kind of system will expand to the Central Asia. And hopefully, this rail system will connect with Europe. So a so-called Eurasia land bridge could be built. So we need money. Also, China has lots of problems. This is smart, very serious. In order to solve this problem, we need huge amount of investment and so on. So investment is not just in physical infrastructure, it's also in social structure, social infrastructure. So this is a primary school in China. So we have very good school, very beautiful buildings, but we have this kind of primary school. It's really a pity. So social security system is bad. So I quote, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor. So this is older pensioner and so on. So we have a tremendous room for future investment. And this not only will pump up the economic growth to allow China to grow at its potential, but also lay a solid foundation for further growth so that in next decade or two, China will be able to maintain a decent growth rate, something like 5 to 6%. So even in my lifetime, I will not be able to see China catching up with the United States. But in my son's time, they will definitely see that. The only problem is whether we can come up with the right policy mix. If we can have a right policy response to China's problem, I'm confident Chinese economy will be able to maintain its current growth momentum. I think I can end here. Thank you.
Professor Yu, thank you so much. Very enlightening. I think we have many questions, and I guess I would start with Rob. Very large, comprehensive presentation. Do you have any further questions on that?
Thank you, Federico. A couple of things occurred to me. First of all, I don't know whether to accuse him of plagiarism or to worship Bob Dylan's knowledge of Chinese parables, because in his song, Love Minus Zero, No Limits, he said, there's no success like failure, and failure's no success at all. And so, as you started, I wondered if Bob Dylan had not studied the Chinese sages in writing these songs. More to the point. You talked about a few American friends who might be disappointed if China overcame the United States. And while most people in Great Britain assured me that they got a better sense of humor once America passed them and that there are some positive developments as well, there is a reaction right now. Some people refer to Donald Trump. Others refer to the TPP, or the opposition to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Others would talk about, for instance, Council on Foreign Relations, an internationalist institution, has a very bellicose and aggressive anti-Chinese report that was released at the end of last year. Is there a chance that the fiscal stimulus that you're talking about will end up being the result of an arms race, will be directed more towards the military than environment, infrastructure, and education, because of a breakdown in U.S.-Chinese relations, leading to the kind of what you might call fiscal response that America experienced at the end of the Depression and going into World War II?
Do you need an honest answer? Okay, yes. If China and United States fail to make a compromise, to respect each other's interests, yes, we may enter a new round of arms race, very unfortunately.
And with your excess capacity, there would be people cheering for that for pure economic reasons.
Sure, that's very natural.
Yeah.
Can I take the opportunity to ask you a just marginally more peaceful question? And I say just marginally because it's about banks. Among the many areas where China is second to the United States, funnily enough, it's not second in terms of banks' balance sheet assets. I think the assets of Chinese banks are about, 40% of world GDP, extremely large. Do you see any danger that might be a breakdown there at some point, and that might have some domino effects around the world?
I think China's the balance sheet of China's banking system really is too large, and it's dangerous. So this is why the Chinese government emphasized the importance of the leveraging. Okay, but the trick is how to make this deleveraging smooth without causing interruption. This is currently my major concern. And out of all good intention, in order to reduce this leverage ratio, you can try to persuade the banks to stop lending to enterprises, or you can persuade enterprises to refrain from borrowing from banks. Then you reduce this leverage ratio. But this will cause a slowdown of the growth. So I think this is very dangerous. If the growth is falling, then this leverage ratio will be increased, which will cause a serious problem. So in China's context, I think we should combine long and short-term solutions to solve this problem. Number one, for the longer run, you have to increase your capital efficiency so that you don't need to invest too much in order to get a very high growth rate. If you invest too much, you have to borrow, okay? And then another very important is to carry out corporate reform to make enterprise more efficient so that they have a higher profitability, so they don't need to borrow. And also, we need to further reform China's capital market. And if you have a very good capital market, then enterprise can raise money from say, by selling shares. But unfortunately, China did a bad job last year and destroyed the credibility of the capital market. So nobody wants to buy shares. So these are also problems. You need to solve this problem. And in terms of a short-term policy, you need to lower interest rate. Interest rate is way too high. And also, you should try to use expansionary fiscal policy to pump up the inflation, so that you reduce the real debt. So we need to combine long-term, short-term solution, and so on. So with all those sort of things, I think China can reduce its leverage ratio, and to reduce this kind of a horrible high debt of a corporate. And at the same time, because China is a very high saving country, saving rate is extremely high. And China has a very large current account surplus. China has more than 6 trillion foreign assets. At the same time, we have something like 3 or 4 trillion foreign liabilities. So we are net credit to the rest of the world. And China is still basically a so-called socialist capital social market economy. We still have a very large amount of state-owned enterprises and state assets. So if there's something wrong, the government has the physical capacity to prevent the asset price from falling. And if asset price is falling, Chinese government has the capacity to inject capital. And also because capital control, there's no way for people to run a bank. They have to put the money on the bank. So we don't need to panic. I think the problem is serious, but there are still many ways to solve this problem. So given time, I think we can solve this problem.
We have about maybe another half an hour or so. I would take questions from the floor. I just stress questions, not speeches. Try to say who you are and keep it short in the interest of the debate. So I see 3 questions here, 1, 2, and 3, and we take them in bundles and so we can answer. Go ahead.
Okay, so we talked about overcapacity in the real estate, and I have a question. I'm a development economist, and I have a question about the two-child policy. So basically, I read that on the 29th of October 2015, there was a change in the existing law regarding the one-child policy. So basically, the new policy allows Chinese couples to have 2 children, and it was proposed to address the aging issue in China. So I have 2 questions. The first question is, do you think that this decrease in the growth was probably caused by the aging of the population? Because we know that when a population ages, this creates an obvious burden on the government finances. And secondly, how do you think this change in the one-child policy will affect growth, if at all, basically? Yeah.
Okay. I think these are very... I'm old. I may forget the questions. Okay.
Hi, Professor Yu. I'm Noya. I wrote my master's thesis on shadow banking system in China. So I'm quite curious about the overcapacity issue you talk about. Do you think in China right now, the banking competition policy is not enough? Maybe we should let the banks feel so that they would understand there is a limit on budget borrowing with local governments, and then we would have a control of the overcapacity at the local level rather than letting it grow and get out of control.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. My question is, there is a topic that for a lot of our societies today, it's one of the key topics, and you went your whole talk without even mentioning it. That is inequality. I was wondering if for the Chinese society this plays any role, and for the political leadership, does it play any role? Thank you.
Okay. About this aging, definitely this is a very important factor which has a negative impact on China economic growth. And actually, since 2012, working population in China decreased by 3 million a year. And so with some time lag, the labor supply will decrease. So, potential growth rate is equal to growth rate of labor productivity plus growth rate of labor supply. So given growth rate of labor productivity, the decline in labor supply, of course, will have a negative impact on China. This actually is quite large, and it will become larger in the future because it's difficult to reverse this demographic change. But I can't give you figures because in China there are so many different studies with a different result. But definitely this is a serious problem for China. And also China should abandon this one-child policy. Actually, China did abandon, but in my view, it's too late. Actually, we have been calling for abandoning this one-child policy for a long time. It's really very late. And after, the government now actually is trying to encourage young people to have more than one child, 2 or even 3, who knows. But the situation is that well-educated young couples do not want to have more than one child. Many of my colleagues, young colleagues, do not have any children. They have no plan to have children. So this is something very serious. We don't know how to solve it. I think this is sort of an Asian problem. In Japan, in Korea, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, heaven everywhere, we are facing this challenge. About the banks, I think the problems with banks are many. I think at this stage, the problem is banks are not well protected. The thing is that the banks are very, very cautious in providing lending, even though some banks has to give loans under certain pressure. But I think the truth is that they are too well protected. And I think there are more than 40% of bank loans are with the collateral, not based on credit. That is not bank, right? And then they also ask people to provide collateral for the collateral. There are lots of guarantees, and then the guarantee need more guarantees. So if one guy fails to pay, then many guys also will fail. So I think banks are overprotected. I think this problem. And also Chinese government should further carry out the liberalization in creating financial institutions. For example, in locality, who knows who is credit worth? Only local people will know. So you should allow small banks and so on and so forth. In this regard, I think China still need to do a lot of things because the Chinese government is very cautious, very timid. They fear this cause huge problems. I think they should take more risk in encouraging to establish more financial institutions, especially at the grassroots level. Otherwise, China's financial problems will not be able to solve. I didn't implicitly mention inequality, but in my photos, actually, I show how serious it is for those high-end condominiums. And poor people will not be able to buy. And also for lots of people in rural areas, they are not really treated very well. I think construction workers from rural area made tremendous contribution to China's economic miracle of the past 30 years. When they grow older, they come back to the countryside without a decent protection. I think the Chinese government realized the importance of the perfection of social security system, know the importance of providing decent public goods to the poor and so on. But to be honest, I think it's far from satisfactory, really. But the direction is very clear. You have to do so. And now I think there's new development. That is pressure groups are booming. Lots of pressure groups, actually, they are demand higher pay, they demand better protection and so on. So the Chinese government should really facilitate this kind of public pressure to improve its system so that we can reduce this inequality. Otherwise, Chinese economic growth will not be possible. Even social stability will not be able to be maintained. So this is a very important issue. Perhaps I should really emphasize this in my presentation.
Shall we take another round of questions? Any hands raised? Again? Okay. This is one. And then another in the back of the room, and three. Okay.
So you mentioned in your presentation that the CPI and PPI are actually dropping, so China is on the verge of deflation, but then you also said your colleagues don't want to raise children. Maybe because I lived in China for so long, I know that raising a child in China is really expensive. So how could you explain these contradictory facts that inflation is going down, but then young people won't be able to raise their children because the expenses are so high, especially, real estate?
Okay.
Good afternoon. How does it work, the shadow banking? Thanks a lot.
And another question about inequality. What do you think about the divergence between the coastal and the inner part of China, and also about poverty as a whole within China? Do you think that the growth of the wages are part of the problem or part of the solution? Because you said that it is important for the social stability to help to aid the poor. But is it economically viable in your opinion?
Okay. This lady's question is interesting and also it's the right question. When we are talking about PPI, we are talking about mainly manufacturing goods prices. Actually, we are talking about the living cost. And I also mentioned the core PPI is core CPI. Without food and gasoline and this sort of thing, actually is rather low, right? And I also mentioned another factor, the housing bubble. The housing price is very high. So why you feel it's difficult to stay in China? Because you have to buy houses. It will cost huge amount of money. I think that's the number one issue for young Chinese. And also service price is very high. You send your children to kindergarten, you have to pay money. You send your children to prime school, officially it should be free of charge. But in order to bribe teachers, then you have to give some bonus to teachers and so on. So all these add up. So you feel the life is hard and so on. I think that's right. I think this kind of complaint is also, it's legitimate. But on the other hand, what I'm trying to say is that PPI has been falling, and this will cause China's growth to drop. I think this is a separate problem. For example, I mentioned that because PPI is falling, so enterprises' real debt has been increasing, right? But I didn't mention that China's CPI is still positive. Why China's CPI is still positive? Just because aging, just because service sector's price has been increasing. But the trouble is that, not trouble, the thing is that service sector is mainly consists of smaller enterprises. They do not borrow heavily from banks, so on. So even you have a positive CPI, it will have no big impact on the real debt, because money go to manufacturing sector, state-owned sector, so on and so forth. So the price of their products actually are falling. So, and also they borrow a lot. So this situation make this so-called debt deflation more serious, which make Chinese economy slowing down. So this is a separate issue from CPI, from your cost of living. So these are two separate things. But on the one hand, we realize China should stop the falling of PPI. But on the other hand, the Chinese government should pay more attention to these very high housing prices. You should really take action to calm down on housing prices, which will make your life happier. And also, China should carry out anti-corruption campaign, which also will make your life easier. Of course, China, following the economic growth, some price of manufacturing goods, which are related with the life, will be slower, which will be able to improve your living standards. So I do not see contradiction between your example and my argument, my description about the problem with the falling PPI causing higher debt deflation spiral. Okay, and
might it also be the case that the falling PPI and fear of debt deflation make people less secure in their feelings about their employment? That with a slump economy, they might be laid off. They might become unemployed.
Theoretically, this is the case. But so far, I think it's not the case yet. Okay, so far, because still very few redundancy and so on. But the government perhaps is prepared to take action to do this, like Zhongji did in later 80s and 90s. Late 80s and 90s, but this has not happened yet, at least in the whole country, not yet. But definitely this will play a certain role in the future. Shadow banking, I think this is a very complicated issue. I need to prepare for another presentation. Basically, this is because sort of regulatory rules and so on. So lots of people want to evade this regulations, and they find chance to invest in some shady projects. And after 2 years calm down on shadow banking activities, I think the situation has been improved very much, because most shadow banking activities is off the balance sheet. Now the government asks all those banks to put all those activities within the balance sheet so that they can have a better supervision. I think the situation has been improved. So until last year, shadow banking activity was regarded as one of the major threats to China's financial stability. This year, I think shadow bank activity has retreated to the rank second or third. The most worrying problem is corporate debt and non-performing loans related with corporate debt. But anyway, each year there's change of topics. Who knows what will be the most important threat to China's financial stability next year. And regional development, that is really it's a very serious problem. So one of the important motivations for Chinese government to propose One Belt, One Road project is to solve these regional imbalances. Because over the past 30 years, east coastal areas developed very rapidly because they have the access to sea. And it's very easy for them to transfer their products to Europe, to the United States. But in hinterland area, it's difficult. It's difficult to trade while Central Asia, so on and so forth. So in order to solve this problem, now Chinese government, I think one of the most important motivation of the Chinese government to propose One Road, One Belt, One Road is to help those hinterland regions to get equal chance. But I think that's difficult. It's really very difficult. Whether this will solve their problem, I don't know. But anyway, intention is good. About last question, about wage. This is a very controversial issue. In China, many people argue that we should against the populism, because if you allow wage to increase too fast, to surpass goals of labor productivity, and China will lose its competitiveness. So until last year, our Minister of Finance argued very strongly, we should constrain this rapid increase in wages. Actually, the growth of wage has been quite rapidly. In China, for many years until recently, the minimum wage should grow at 13% by law in each area, 13% each year. Of course, it will be fast and goes rate of labor productivity. But my personal view is that China should allow people to increase their wages to catch up, because in the past, the growth is too slow. And when Chinese economy is suffering from overcapacity, increase in wages will help they spend more, which will become a very important driver for economic growth. So I'm not sympathetic with the view of anti-populism. I think if we increase wages, the labor productivity will increase. And under pressure of wage increase, enterprise will try their best to seek growth in the area of innovation, creation, so on and so forth. That will be a positive development in China.
Can I ask you one question? I have been trying to review a few facts or factoids. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I think China is producing today about 300,000 engineers every year. That compares with, I think, 30,000 in Italy. If you project current trends, probably China will overtake Italy in terms of the share of tertiary graduated people over the total population, about 25 to 30% in the mid 2020s. And it's fast becoming also a technological country. Think about Alibaba, think about Huawei, and many other examples. How important is this tech sector to China today and in perspective?
I think it's very, very important. I did mention it because lack of statistics. This sort of undercurrent is extremely important, especially in Shenzhen and in many other places. Lots of young people, they are highly motivated, well treated, and they go to that place, just like Americans go to Silicon Valley. And in China, there are quite a lot of these kind of things. And also in terms of ID technology, Alibaba, I know mine personally, and these guys are extremely creative, very clever. And many young people told me that in the future, Chinese economy really will grow again very strongly because of this sort of development. And also Chinese government pay great attention to encourage creation and innovation. Especially this is a mantra of Premier Li Keqiang. Whenever he goes, he will talk about this. So he shows the things, these kind of things are extremely important. But comparative with China's whole economy, this is still a very small section. So at least in short run, the contribution of this sector to China's economic growth is not that large. But we pin hope in the future.
I have two in the front row, and then maybe a third one up there.
Could I simply ask about a bit more information about the relation of the state-owned enterprises and these newer private sector firms? If I'm a state-owned enterprise, do I try to get into that sector? Can I do it? Or do I just sort of sit there and cut excess capacity? Just, I mean, it's a little hard for me to quite imagine how these relate. And when I saw all of your price indices, I mean, I asked myself, gee, it looks like you've got a kind of monopolistic sectors there that could very well take cash out and then pour the money into something else. And does that turn we're used to thinking of the tech sector in China along the lines of Silicon Valley. But as I study this, I begin to wonder if that is not yet one more illusion in the West about how China actually works.
I think this question It's rather complicated. Can we talk later? Okay.
There are companies like Google or Facebook
Yes.
which want to do much more in your country.
Yes.
What would you recommend? In which way should foreign investment be fostered in China?
I think this is really political. In my view, I will welcome those enterprise heart and soul, because I'm a researcher. I need to get to know information as quickly, as cheaply as possible. But I feel very difficult. Sometimes I have to send an email to London to ask my son to collect data, so then send back to me. It's really very wasteful. I think Chinese government need to change its mentality. You should believe in the people, believe in people's judgment. But I think because this political problem, not commercial, not because of fear of competition, mainly because of political. So I'm not very optimistic for any big change in foreseeable future. But definitely Chinese intellectuals and the public wish that this kind of change should happen as soon as possible.
We are running out of time, so we have just time for one last question. I think it was up there.
In Europe, we are really, really worried about the pollution of China. In December, we saw pictures of Beijing and the red fog of Beijing. So I wonder is it important for China, for the public thinking of China, to promote, to implement other kind of investments rather than investments on infrastructure, investments on green energy or renewable energies?
Yes, and actually when we are talking about investment in infrastructures, actually we are also talking about building facilities which can purify air, water, so on and so forth. This is the part of important component of infrastructure investment. I think the awareness of the importance of pollution in China has increased very dramatically. Chinese people are very serious. You know, there are some demonstrations and so on. I think most of those demonstrations are related with pollution. So even though government want to build what that's called PX factory, the chemical factory, it's very difficult because all was cause demonstration. So the local government has to cancel those projects, even though those projects are very beneficial to the economic growth in those regions. And also in this regard, we are grateful for U.S. Embassy. For the rest, we are not so grateful, because they publish this kind of statistic of a small particle. I think this makes a tremendous contribution to the awareness of pollution among Chinese public. Thank you.
So that was the last question. Thank you so much, Professor Yu. Thank you, Rob and INET, for this opportunity. And thank you all.